Are you the fanatic we're looking for? Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is the only interactive and dynamic mock draft simulator. Dynamic means that the picks from one mock draft will influence the players that team selects in the next mock draft. This can be done with a first-round challenge. This can be done with a second-round challenge. This will be done with any mock draft from the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has rank players functionality, allowing you to rank players and build your own big board and then compare your board to that of other users at the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has draft a team functionality. This allows 2 or more users to snake draft a team of 22 players from the rookie pool, and then you can debate which players you like at which position and why. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, and I'm joined today by Randall and Travis. And Travis, this is your first time with us, so welcome.
Yeah,
how are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm coming off a really busy college football season. Got one more game to go, but AZ Sports has been a busy year as we've added 10 new team sites covering the sport more nationally this year. And so, yeah, I've been taking on a whole lot of responsibility this year and just figuring things out as the site grows and the viewership grows, and just really enjoying the community. And it's just been an exhausting, solid season, but kind of glad that we're in draft season now, so I can kind of just, I don't know. Once I get this far, I already know all the players because I've been watching them for like 4 years, and they were high recruits probably before that. So it's like, okay, now I can coast. I know what's going down now. So it's my favorite time of year.
There you go.
Awesome. So good evening, Randall. It seems like I just saw you just the other night.
Yeah, 2 days ago. Not too bad, but wide receivers are always fun. So I'll always talk about wide receivers.
Cool. Well, we are going to be covering some tight ends tonight. So this is the final tight end scouting report podcast. So I think we covered 12 several weeks ago. We covered like another 10 the weekend or the week after that. Today, I think we have 6 left that we want to cover. And then we're going to go over some tight end big boards at the end of the podcast. So let's kick this off with Harold Fannin from Bowling Green. So, Randall, what do you want to tell us about Harold Fannin?
All right, yeah, Harold Fannin, junior, Bowling Green, 6'4", 230. He's pretty quick. I project him to run maybe like a 4.62 40, 4.65 40. Originally recruited as a linebacker, dual athletes, guy in high school, played baseball, which I kind of love. He had a pretty good dime against Penn State when he was throwing it. Looked good, to be honest, with the elbow. But, I mean, what we're talking about is really, his offensive weapon ability in him. Bowling Green, he's got 117 catches, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns. He can line up anywhere. He goes out wide. He sits in trip sets out wide, play in the slot. Solid offensive weapon as well. He has 3 touchdowns on passing at 20-plus or more, 2 in 10 in intermediate, and 3 in short, and 1 behind the line of scrimmage. So he is able to score on all 4 levels. His yards per route run is 3.65, which is nuts. I really do like his route running. He's elusive at the stem for a tight end, which is kind of rare, and he's got really good timing on his slants. He's got good elusive work, as well as when he's in the open field, he can kind of take off. He had a really good touchdown against Texas A&M that hit that second level, and then he bobbed and weaved his way into the end zone. That was super impressive as well. I mean, he's got it all. He's a yak monster. 873 yards out of his 1,555 came from after the catch, going for 7.5 yards after the catch per reception. Accounted for 44 first downs on, or 64 first downs on 117 catches. He's got great hands, He's in the middle of the field at all times, and he can catch those. He had a great catch against Penn State where two defenders were coming at him pretty quickly. Still didn't lose focus, held onto the ball. That was one of my favorite catches of his. A lot of people are a little confused, a little bit by competition and how he'll do in the NFL. But, he played Penn State this year and Texas A&M, came with over 100 yards. Each had a touchdown in that game. So I do not worry. I don't see that as a flag for him coming into the NFL because he's already proven with tougher talent at that point. His big thing probably is blocking. He's not a great blocker. He doesn't really need to be used in blocking in the NFL, in my opinion. If we're looking at 12 personnel, you can have one person that's a better blocker, one that's a catcher sort of thing. So I'm kind of good with that. It's a yellow flag because he's a very bad blocker, but just don't use him as a blocker, in my opinion. I have him as my tight end 3 with which we'll show after that. I have him my tight end 3 in an early second round selection. And Travis, what did you see?
Yeah, Harold Fannin is a fun one just because he came in at the very beginning of his career. He was like a linebacker recruit and no hype whatsoever. And he was not supposed to be a thing, decides, the coaching staff finds him a role at tight end. He grows into that pretty quickly, blows up in what was his true sophomore year, I guess, for Bowling Green. And so it's great to see him break out in the way that he did and just dominate. And then set records this past year, which was just incredible to see. He had over 1,500 yards on the season. And I don't know if you guys actually watched the game in which he did break the record, but it was an incredible play. He caught it and then just pushed his way through 4 or 5 different defenders as he's carrying them, past the record. And so it was just beautiful poetry in action on the football field. So really like what I see in terms of his skill set, given the short amount of time that he's actually really played this as his full-time position at, the top levels of college football outside of, he's not power conference, but so his resume, I think he can get better, which is scary for a player who just broke the single season record for most receiving yards by a tight end. He's a little bit undersized in terms of like historical thresholds that we want to see in terms of really every down ability at the next level. We've seen some, undersized guys be 6'3", 220 something even. I think back to when Evan Ingram came out and he was basically just a big slot for Ole Miss back in the day. And people were like, oh, he's not going to really be an every down type of player. He can't contribute. But of course, the NFL has constantly changed over the last decade and a half in terms of how they employ skill position players. And so I think in today's game, Fannin can fit, can work. I like you have some questions about his blocking and can he really play inline at all at the next level? And is he going to be able to win in blocking situations because of his weight, his height? I'm not sure he's a legit 6'4" either, So it's just there are questions with him because of the profile, because of where he played, because of his background, his short resume at the position. But when I do see him succeed at it, just being the best receiving weapon outside of maybe Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland in this class at the tight end position. So I don't see him as necessarily an early second round pick, but we're nitpicking here because once you get outside the top 20 or so, the things really start to scatter in this particular class. So I would say it's probably more around the round 2-3 turn. At least that's what we're seeing in terms of our scale mock draft data within our own team at A to Z Sports in the last 30 or so mock drafts there. And then, there are other resources out there to pull like mock draft database and stuff and see where the consensus has been lying with him. But he's rising, I think, as more people realize, holy cow, yes, Bowling Green State, but man, he's got some receiving skills. Man, he knows where to be. His spatial understanding is just above and beyond what I think it should be given his experience at this point. And that's why he finds success against the better competition, because he knows where the defenders are going to be and where the leverage is supposed to be. And I think his defensive background actually probably helps in that regard. So, man, I like Fannin. I could see him being an every down contributor. I want to maybe see him gain a little bit of weight, healthy weight, and maintain that speed that I think you probably hit it on the head. Low 4.6s is probably where about he's going to be at the combine, but really intrigued to see what that speed looks like given what he put on display this past year.
Yeah, so Travis, if you had to think of an offensive coordinator or two where if they got their hands on Fannin, that would be a really good fit. Anybody immediately come to mind?
Well, the one favorite slot for me, obviously, I think for many even would be to land with the Chiefs. Like at the end of round 2, you just go to the Chiefs and be the next Travis Kelce. No one's going to be the next Travis Kelce, but
Right.
be the heir to a role that tries to be Travis Kelce. You know, I think that would be, oh man, that would be picture perfect type scenario to me. But even more practically, I think even with the Eagles, Dallas Goedert has been really good and consistent, but somebody with maybe just a hair more explosion to his game and more dynamism in his receiving threat there, because Goddard is actually already 29. I think it'll be 30 before the season begins. And so maybe they're looking to move on for a longer term option there, and they can run some 12 personnel because the tight ends after Goddard are really gross there. So maybe that would be a situation where he might land there and immediately find a role in success, and then be a long-term, tight end 1, top 10, top 15, maybe even better than that in the league here soon.
Randall, how about you? If you had to think of a couple teams that might be a good scheme fit for Fannin,
I think in a new system and a helper at a rookie quarterback would do them wonders. I think maybe if a good offensive coach goes to Chicago, or even New England's got Vrabel now, but to help out one of those rookie quarterbacks, I think would be decent. Caleb Williams would love that. But also, let's say in a situation where New England maybe figures out their offensive line through free agency, and they go at 4 Ted McMillan, and then at 36 Harold Fannin, that would be a nice duo that would work well with Drake May, and I think Drake May would succeed very well with Ted and Harold.
Yeah, or even with Jaden Daniels. I guess because how many times has Zach Ertz done this now? He basically he's passed the baton to the guy who replaced him.
Yeah.
But when he was still with the Eagles, he did that with Goddard. He went over to the Cardinals. He did that with Trey McBride, and now he goes back, and so now he could pass the baton to Fannin. And he's just that tight end guru. And obviously he's going to be a tight ends coach and probably an offensive coordinator himself one day, because he's 100%. Worked his magic a couple times already. So that would be fun.
Yeah, I did not see Zach Ertz coming this year to be like still reliable in that Washington offense. I love it.
Yeah.
And veteran tight ends, you can never underestimate having a veteran tight end where we think, okay, he's not an elite fantasy football player, but that doesn't mean that he's not an elite NFL player or a really good NFL player, right?
Yeah.
I think Fannin to the Texans. Right. So the Texans are definitely going to need some pass receiving assistance early in the draft, whether they go wide receiver, tight end.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would see Fannin going to the Texans in round 1, but if he fell to Houston in round 2, that seems to make sense. So, okay. Next player, Jake Briningstool from Clemson. So, Travis, what do you have on Jake Briningstool?
So Jake is so I am in Middle Tennessee area. I am probably sitting 20 minutes or so from where he went to high school. And so he was a big deal, huge deal when he was here. But it was funny because I knew just through my cousins who also went to the similar high schools and played against them. The take was that he was kind of soft. Like he had all these offers and he was like this big deal in the area. And yeah, he'd make like some crazy plays here and there. But then I also had a buddy who was like a safety. He was like, nah, I had him on lock. And and so of course he's an athletic guy. He went on to play lacrosse in college, but he wasn't, good enough to go play at a top tier school. But the critique with him was play strength. And he was like 6'5", like 2 and change. Like he might've been listed at 215, but like if you stood next to him, you're like, I don't know, dude. I'm not sure you're crossing 200 that much here. And so he really had to fill things out. Like he was always going to be a dynamic weapon once he figured it out, but he really bulked up, added some weight. I think depending on the listing that you see, he's 230, he's 240, he's 243. I think he's probably going to bulk a little bit with water weight just to be weigh-ins, 235 at the combine, and then, just try to shed that in time for the sprint for the 40s. A lot of people do that, but I want to see him continue to develop and add strength to his game. He got better at that in terms of being a more complete player. But his value was as a receiver, even when he wasn't actually like a high volume target for them in his early years. Like that's how they plugged him in and used him when he was on the field. And so I want to see him fill that out, add some blocking to his game and add some more consistency to his game. But he was able to actually add some significant value this past year because he added strength, not even just as a blocker, but adding yak this year more so because he would fight through that first contact, fight through that first tackle. And so we saw a step in the right direction, but I just want to see him get better at that. And so again, one of those players who's just slightly undersized. He's not that he's probably never going to reach 250, and that's okay. He doesn't have to, and that's fine. He's probably going to be more primarily deployed in the slot as he was at Clemson. I think something close to 60% or something last year, and that's okay. But just some more balance to his game because he's always going to be a receiving threat. He's got the wingspan. I'm interested just to see what his wingspan is at the combine. There's always those freaks that are like, oh, this guy's arms. Like Briningstool might be one of those guys. It's like, yeah, he's like 6'6", but like he's got like a 9-foot wingspan. And so I just want to see what he looks like at the combine, and it'll be cool to be. I don't think I've seen him in person since like high school, so it'll be kind of cool to be there in person and just see how he tests because I think he could be a winner in combine season.
Yeah, what that wingspan that kind of like stuck out when I was watching tape throughout the year was when they were playing Texas too at the end, and when he was going on that second level right across, and it was right over that defender going to the sideline, and I could not believe he plucked that out of the air, but you could see his arms, how long his arms were, and it was an impressive throw by Cade. Impressive catch by Jake Briningstool, and that was great. And he had a great game on there. I do think, like, when you're looking at on a production standpoint, it's a little confusing to see, and you're trying to match the tape with where his 100-yard games are, where his 40-yard games are, and things like that. It's kind of almost like sometimes the Clemson scheme, how they game planned with him, was a little off. Some games his average depth of target was 3 yards, like 3.0, and then some games were 11.5 with his average depth of target. And then when you're looking at that was Wake Forest, where he went 7 for 104 and 1. And then with 3, you're looking at Georgia, that was only like 3 and 26. So some of the game planning with Briningstool in there was a little confusing, and that's where I believe his production was a little bit up and down. But I did like his blocking and where his blocking game ended at this year. I think he did have good hand placement, and he did anchor a little bit well. So he was consistent in the blocking game, and then he can just learn more in strength and conditioning in the NFL, learn to be a better blocker. But I did like what I saw by the end of this year with his run game. I do have pretty much everything that you had. I agree with, and I do have him in around the end of the third to the mid fourth, like a fringe 100 player for me. I do like his style.
Yeah, to me, he's like round 4 is probably the sweet spot for me because I think most of. And again, it gets a little wonky because this class has some clear tier breaks in terms of groups of prospects. When you talk to any kind of set of scouting personnel, like it's like after 20, and then like from that point you got up to like maybe 70-ish, and then there's this weird drop off again, like a little bit earlier than we've been seeing the last couple of classes. And so you could see some teams go completely different directions that you wouldn't expect. So we might actually see a tight end run at the end of round 3, and that's where he goes. But if I was a GM, I'd be hoping, hey, let's just get to the back half of round 4, and I feel like I'm stealing.
Agreed.
And I think one of the other things, Travis, that works into that too is that rookie tight ends don't typically play much, right? Like if you look at like the rookie tight end seasons, if you gain like 400 yards receiving, that's a top 20 rookie tight end season.
Yeah.
So are you going to spend a day 2 pick and not get that immediate production? I think that's why that run on tight ends is going to happen closer to day 3 than it will on day 2.
I agree. I think the only 3 safe bets for day 1 and day 2 capital are Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, and Harold Fannin. We might not see it any more than that. But there's a handful of others that if teams feel like they need to reach for need, and there are a few that have that need at the end of round 3, that's where I could see it happening. But if it doesn't happen there, you might be waiting a little bit again for a longer run. And we haven't seen extremely deep tight end classes over the last 10 years, even though there's been kind of a revolution at the position in terms of how they are impactful if they're actually really good. There's been an uptick in that regard, but it's 11, 12, 13 tight ends in a whole draft. So seeing more than just a few go early is probably not to be expected.
So Randall, you want to tell us about Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame?
Yeah, Mitchell Evans, Notre Dame, 3-star prospect, Two-sport athlete, basketball and football. He's 6'5", 260. I'm guessing he's going to run like a 4.72, 4.75 on the 40. So he's got some good speed with that 260 pounds. I do like his size in the 6'5", 260. As a receiver, he's used in the slot a good amount as well as on the line. So he kind of goes out on the slot more, which I do enjoy. He is quick off the line on his initial release. The releases are a little bit different from the stem. The stem of his route is not so great in my opinion. I think he just kind of uses his body to leverage him inside or outside the way he kind of goes on that. But to be honest, he has a little twitch off that line of scrimmage where he kind of does create separation and go from there. So it kind of hides that stem work a little bit for me. I would like to see him work on some contact balance and some yards after the catch. It does feel like, in my opinion, he goes down on the first hit or the second hit. Somebody's close to him. He's got only about 4.1 yards after the catch per reception, while his average depth of target is only 6.6. So he's not gaining much afterwards, and they are kind of using him in the short game. I do kind of wish with his size, and he's got some decent speed, that they used him more in that deep threat. If you look back at the USC touchdown, he basically just did a post to the corner pylon, and it was perfect. And he didn't have much separation, but he came down with that contested catch, and I'd like to see that more out of him, which I would hope the NFL would kind of use him in that, to be honest. He did tear his ACL back in October of 2023, so that derailed that season. So I would like to make sure that those medicals are kind of a green flag, which I'm sure they will be. I have him as a round 4 in that tight end run sort of situation, probably more or less in the round 5, mid-round 5. But I'm curious to see how the offseason works with him. Being from Notre Dame and his accolades and stuff like that, I wonder if how his work ethic is and how his film tape goes, how he can design that on a whiteboard and things along those lines that could push him up into round 4. But right now it's like late round 4, round 5 for me.
Yeah, what do they call them? The Blesto and a couple other like official scouting services, like the early work on future classes that gets published and sent out to all the NFL teams. Like certain teams are contracted to receive the Blesto earlier. Certain teams are contracted to receive the other couple versions of early scouting work. And Mitchell Evans was one that about a year ago, people were like, okay, we're expecting great things out of him. He should take a leap. He could be an early round pick. And I never really saw early round pick with him. I was like, man, he's a little stiff and not super dynamic for somebody who's being utilized in the role that he is in. So I felt like he's an odd fit given the skill set, and he's never really peaked in any given one season. In terms of like nerdy predictive numbers that I care about with tight ends and actually being able to stick in today's day and age for receiving purposes, like you might be a blocking tight end, and he can still improve in that regard, but he might be that at the next level. But in terms of an every down player that can be a go-to option for a team, I don't see that in his profile because he falls short in a lot of different categories, whether it's, his receiving yards per team pass attempt marks, which typically you want to see like a drafted tight end be like around 1.5 receiving yards per team pass attempt. If they're going to be a significant threat, they can be both efficient and handle volume for their team's offense. Other nerdy things like weighted dominator, general dominator rating that accounts for like overall percentage of a team's offense and what they do. He never even eclipsed 15%, which is generally what we count as like a true breakout year for tight end as well. So in terms of a meaningful metric standpoint, he falls way short, and he never met the expectations that even the early scouting services had for him. From a film standpoint, he just is. I don't think he has the dynamic skill set necessary to thrive in the league. So for me, he's like a mid day 3 kind of tight end for me. That can be a blocker if you want him to. You can kick him out in the slot, and he can punch a linebacker in the mouth, but he's not going to separate on his own via speed.
100%.
Okay. Next tight end, Caden Prieskorn from Ole Miss. Travis.
Yeah, so this year, I just by default in my role as we've kind of added some team sites, one of the teams I worked most closely with was Ole Miss, and it was a lot of fun because they had the best pass rush in the nation. They had Jackson Dart, who had like the highest meaningful metric season by far, next to only maybe like Cam Ward. There was a lot of fun. They had Trey Harris for the first 7 weeks, and he had like almost 1,000 yards. And Prieskorn himself, he would break off some plays here and there. You're like, okay, I see it. Okay, I get it. He had the long touchdown, I guess it was against Furman. The week 1, he had the impressive play against who was it? Oklahoma. But he would kind of disappear at times this season. It was so odd because there was a lot of hype surrounding what he could be. I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago, honestly, because I feel like he's been around for a minute. I think it was his what was his final year at Memphis? Yeah, his final year, year 3 of his career. He came out of nowhere. He was not supposed to be this big deal, but he had like 600 plus receiving yards, over a half dozen touchdowns, and immediately one of the most highly coveted players, assets on the transfer market, entering into this transfer age where you can play immediately. And so there was all this hype around him. And that was the best we saw out of Prieskorn. He too never really put it together and became this dynamic weapon as a receiver. And yes, he was okay as a pass blocker, but this past season, he was really spotty in that regard too. Jackson Dart was fine at avoiding pressure, but sometimes it wouldn't even be the offensive line. It would be like Prieskorn that totally blew it on like just not even chipping somebody right or strong enough, being in the right position. So I have questions there. But I do think, as I try to get into the nitty gritty of it all, I do have Prieskorn over Evans because I do believe that his receiving upside is greater. Even though we saw it against a lower level of competition, he does meet, even adjusted for schedule, production thresholds that I want to see. That most NFL teams, they all have analytics people who care about the similar things. I've had conversations. The metrics that I mentioned are general, like they're proxy versions of what different teams use in their analytics departments now. But Prieskorn is going to check enough boxes that I think he actually goes up above Evans. Like he could sneak in around 4, but maybe he's like round 5, round 6 with Evans too.
Yeah, to piggyback on his pass protection, I mean, with that Furman touchdown that he had, then on that Furman game, he had a terrible missed assignment on that block that led to that tip ball that was an interception. That was just brutal. It was like a high school block trying to block somebody sort of thing. So I saw that in the pass protection for sure. He's allowed 4% pressures on 29 pass blocking snaps, so that's not a good percentage at all. I do agree with you when it comes down to his receiving threat. I do love it. He kind of gives me a little bit of Quentin Morris vibes, as I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, to where he has those streaks that he can catch like one touchdown. Quentin Morris gets one touchdown a year, but he does break out in there, and he has kind of that similar route running to it. But without those blockers, just like Quentin Morris being able to, Buffalo brings out an extra offensive lineman, not Quentin Morris, to kind of help with the run game sort of thing. So I like his receiving aspect of it, and I kind of had him right where Mitchell Evans was. I think I do have Mitchell Evans earlier than him, but I do have Prieskorn right around that same area.
Nice. Yeah. Same page.
Yeah.
We need to disagree more.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we're going to, maybe here.
Okay, so second to last, Moliki Matavao will be at the Senior Bowl. So I believe we've covered him on a Senior Bowl podcast. But Randall, what do you have?
Yeah, UCLA, 6'6", 263. He was a 4-star prospect, turned into a 3-star transfer, started in Oregon, went over to UCLA. I believe one of his teammates from Oregon got him over to UCLA. He also did have an offer before he chose Oregon first, so it was an easy choice for him. He's had a couple good 100-yard games against Rutgers and Fresno State. 8 catches on 11 targets, Rutgers being 6 catches on 6 targets for over 100 yards. He is mainly just a pass-catching tight end, in my opinion. I think they take him out for blocking. To be honest, I don't see him much in blocking. I think less than 25% of his snaps are blocking, so everything else is receiving. I like his route running, where he can put it for 263 from what I had on him, is he can put his foot in the ground and cut, which I was pretty impressed with that, and he can be a little bit elusive for his size. My big concern is, his back-to-back touchdowns. Each year, 2 touchdowns per year. And I'd like to see him more in that red zone, but I also do credit a little bit of UCLA's system and UCLA's poor quarterback play to kind of go in with that, just kind of like J. Michael Sturdivant. But overall, I do like his receiving, and I do like it. He is not a blocker. I think he's a really bad blocker, and that's a big issue, especially with this NFL now. I do have him with his offensive power. I wouldn't be surprised if he falls in that fringe 175, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in that 7th round.
So Travis, how about you?
Yeah, he's kind of like that fringe player for me. He's around 6'7" kind of grade in terms of like class agnostic look at what he brings. I think what he does bring is a versatile skill set as a receiver in terms of where he can line up pre-snap, and he's a mismatch problem, and UCLA figured that out, and so they were able to kind of line him up even kind of wide sometimes, which is not super normal for a guy who's 260 pounds. But they can if the right team gets a hold of him, they can take advantage of the skill set that he has and put him in the right spot, and a few times a game. Get him a reception against a linebacker who should not be covering him, that kind of situation. So I think that's where his value is going to be. He's not, again, like you said, a blocking tight end by any means. So I think he's limited. He has a limited resume of really impressive production, which is basically just this last year. And so it took him a while to do anything. So early breakouts matter as well when predicting future success. And so he didn't really have much of anything to speak of until really this past year, where I don't have his exact numbers in front of me, but it was like 500 something receiving yards. And even like when you look at the scale of his offense, he didn't really cross meaningful thresholds outside of like his receiving yard market share. Like I think it was 16, 17% or so of his team's mark there, which is good enough. But that's about all he checks in terms of boxes that I want to see. They're like, oh, that guy could be like an early day 3. Oh, that guy could be an every down player. So to me, he's not an every down player. Maybe he continues to grow as a blocker. Maybe he adds another layer to his game. And I will give him credit. He clearly had to learn a way different system going from Oregon to UCLA. And then he completely shifted his role. Blocking disappeared. He was out wide, in line, in the slot. He's learning new roles within the offense. So maybe he does add layers and exceeds expectations, but mine aren't very high as of right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last scouting report we're going to do is Tyler Warren from Penn State. So Travis, you want to tell us, is he tight end 1, tight end 2, and then tell us all about it?
I mean, if he's not tight end 1, he's tight end 2. And the only argument for tight end 2 even would be the fact that Colston Loveland is just a freaking monster himself. But in terms of being everything that you want in a tight end, I think Tyler Warren can do that. If you need him to throw some touchdowns, he'll do that. If he needs to rush some touchdowns, he'll do that. I mean, he had like 1,200 plus receiving yards and then a few hundred rushing yards at 6'6", 260, 1,500 total yards from scrimmage, I believe, or almost that mark. And so what he does every single game is kill you with his strength, kill you with his low-key, sneaky speed, which I feel like all the Penn State tight ends somehow, when maybe it's the uniforms, I don't know, they look like they're running with cement blocks on their shoes, and then somehow they get to the combine, it's like, oh yeah, 4.5, and so it's every single time, like whether it's Mike Gesicki or whoever it is, it's like, wait, what? He just ran what now? I did not see that coming, and so I think he could surprise with his speed as well, and so to do what he did. Again, later in his career, but to do what he did this past year was really special. And another guy who got really good early scouting grades from all the film only minds. I'm a film plus analytics nerd, but the guys who were getting grades 2 teams a year or 2 in advance, because they'll get the early declared guys. A smaller sample of like 30 to 50 guys that might go the next year. They'll get things really early. So it's been a few years that he's been like, hey, keep an eye on this guy. Like he could be around 2 grade or whatever for a couple years now. And so given that fact, given that the league's, he's been on the radar for a while. I'm not surprised that he put it together, but to do what he did is almost unprecedented. So yes, I think the farthest that he falls is like pick 20 realistically. And at this point, it's almost a lock that he goes to the Colts at pick 14.
Yeah. I mean, he's a Colt. He sounds like a Colt, looks like a Colt. I think Colts is pretty much where he fits. I do think Warren does go ahead of Loveland, but I do have Loveland ahead. I think he's a better all-around tight end, but I do think that Warren goes with his explosive playmaking sort of thing. But, I mean, you pretty much hit most of it when it comes down to it. But he does do everything. And when you talk about, like, Penn State, how they run, when you're surprised when they run, The only time that I do see like that extra speed where I wonder where his 40 is going to go is when he's got a lot of open field, like a quick middle of the field curl sort of thing, and then he's got blockers in front of him. You could see him kind of take off. His speed kind of shows there on that second level, and it is super impressive. I mean, his yards per route run was 2.47 for this year, which is really impressive. Notable yards per route run for this year, like Aronde Gadsden, who was pretty much Syracuse's offense, was 1.93. Fannin was 3.76. Loveland was 2.67. Kyle Pitts was 3.26, and Brock Bowers was 2.65. So he's got great. Love that stat for great for yards per route run. I think his blocking was pretty underrated. I think he started out this year not in the best blocker, but I think by the end of the year he became a really good blocker. He definitely has to fine tune some of it, like during the Boise State game, like he lost an assignment on a 3rd and 3. That was pretty important. That led to a 4th down in a 1-score game. So some of that stuff he just needs to fine tune, but I do think his blocking is a little bit underrated because people are only talking about his offensive playmaking ability. But I mean, you hit it as well. I think that rushing and those direct snaps are unsung, and that'll help for if Indianapolis takes them, because a lot of NFL runs those 4th down conversions, direct snaps, and things along those lines, and he can be that guy. So I think it's big. I have him as my 1B, but I do think that he will get drafted before Loveland.
Yeah, I will say that if we're projecting for upside long term, like right now, I take Tyler Warren. But upside projection, given the trajectory of his career at Penn State as a prospect, if you look at him, because he's technically a year 5 guy out of high school. And so when we compare him to Harold Fannin and Colston Loveland today, they're 2 years behind him in terms of development. And so what we love to see is an early, I mentioned this before, an early kind of breakout season. I mean, if you're breaking out at 15% of your offense, 20% of your offense in your second year as a tight end, which is I mean, tight ends, the production in college is just trash. Like it for the most part, it's really bad. And so if you can account for that level of production and then be efficient with it, that's impressive. That's impressive. And he didn't do that until like year 4. He kind of meant like absolute minimum threshold. And then year 5 is when he blew up. Whereas Colston Loveland and Fannin were like above, hey, if they were drafted today as sophomores, they would meet all the data predictive analytics thresholds now. And so to me, that's more impressive. And that's why I believe that like a guy like Loveland, having him as 1A, if you're swinging for the fences, Loveland's your guy. Because he had like a half of the team's offense, almost more receiving yards than the entire group of wide receivers on Michigan, despite the worst quarterback play in the nation pretty much all year long. And so I get having him 1A over Tyler Warren. For people who are like just looking at mock drafts, like, what are you thinking? How could you have him over? No, like Loveland is legit. Fannin is legit. And they're doing it 2 years earlier than Tyler Warren just did. So all 3 of these players should hit and be successful and be the 3 best tight ends in the class by far.
Oh yeah, and watching Loveland, you're just looking, and all I could think of is his stats could be so much higher with better QB play, like wide open, so much separation, just overthrown. Yeah,
every time.
Okay, so why don't we pause for a quick commercial? So Travis, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody, tell them where they can find your content and some of the other things that you do?
Yeah, I don't think of it as a commercial. I just love talking football with anybody. So if you want to bother me, tell me like I'm wrong or way too high on Jackson Dart or something, that's fine. You can find me on X. I guess I'm just sticking with that. It's not Twitter anymore. X at @FF_Travis M. I'm on Blue Sky too. My company wanted me to do that. You can find me there at just Travis May. But I love talking football anywhere and everywhere. But you can find all my written work now these days at A2ZSports.com. I'm the college football managing editor there. Good thing I'm not having to talk. I'm just write for a living. But it's been great to see that just grow. If you're not familiar with A to Z, they've been around like since 2016, but went national, covering all 32 NFL teams a few years ago. And this past year decided to go national with myself and a group of 12 writers to cover all the major brands, all the Georgias, the Ohio State, the Notre Dame, all the big name, Texas. And so it's been cool to see that kind of grow. And this past year to eclipse 100 million page views and direct traffic was incredible. And just to see it, I don't know, just really proud of the team. They're just putting out really quality work. And the draft group, there's like 8 of us that are just constantly working on draft content. I think we had 4 mock drafts released this week, and big boards and a whole bunch of profiles. We're already up to 100 draft profiles, prepping for Senior Bowl week and stuff like that. So it's just fun to be a part of a really talented group of team writers that love the sport as much as I do, because it's hard to find like normal people in life that just want to talk about tight ends at 8:45 p.m. Central. That may or may not get drafted. That's not normal. So anyway, Travis May at A to Z Sports is all my content, but at FF_Travis M on X is where you can find me most easily. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Randall.
All right, at Randall Slifer on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. You can find all my stuff on Twitter and Blue Sky, as well as Draft Professors, where I'm doing my podcast and things like that. So you can find everything on there. And I apologize, I did not know that you were on A to Z. I do read A to Z Sports a decent amount. I found them, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So it's cool to meet somebody that works for them, for sure.
Hey, man. Yeah, it's been fun, dude. It's like when I first started, it was like I'm at A to Z. Just even this past year, like, oh, I've heard of that. So it's cool to see just kind of getting there now. So it's fun.
Cool. Well, for everybody watching, and there are a lot of you, please hit that like and that subscribe on YouTube, and give at NFL Draft Fanatic a follow on both YouTube and X. So this channel has daily draft content. So we podcast on the draft every day. Monday we did some wide receivers at the Senior Bowl. Tuesday was mock draft. Today's Wednesday. We're doing tight ends. Tomorrow's an interior offensive line big board. Friday, you will see Bill Sparks, who's in the chat, doing some Senior Bowl coverage. Next week, we start double dipping. So there will be 2 podcasts every night next week, I think, for the first time. So we'll be covering things like what's the DNA of a Final Four NFL team. So every night next week, we will be doing 1 hour on one of the Final Four NFL teams. So whichever teams make it to the conference championship, the draft professors are going to be doing a deep dive. How did the roster get built? How did they draft? And just kind of looking for, let's say, roster trends. Are they drafting certain positions early or certain positions late, or always finding something in free agency? We will discover that tomorrow, or discover that next week. So there are about 30 people at the Draft Professor that help us put out the daily content. And then sometimes we have guests like Travis come in. This is Travis's first podcast with us, but great job, Travis. I definitely appreciate you doing this. And we're going to go over the Randall's tight end big board. And then Travis, if you want to kind of share your board, like after Randall kind of talks through his, you're more than welcome to either ask Randall questions on his, if you
just trash
have
mine,
a question,
and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
I'll do that. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
So I don't have a graphic for mine, so you guys don't have to. Yeah. There's no proof. So
there you go.
Yeah. So Randall, do you want to talk through your rankings and kind of the tiers that you have them in?
Definitely. All right. So sorry, I'm just going to pull up my graphic just because it's a little light on there. All right. So number 1, Colston Loveland. I do have him as my tight end 1. I love his all-around ability. His blocking's incredible, and his hands are mittens, and he's just he knows zone, man, everything. He can run all the routes. Fantastic. And then I have Tyler Warren, number 2, of course. I believe that, as we talked about, Tyler Warren will go ahead of Colston Loveland based on his playmaking ability. But Tyler Warren, we just talked about. Harold Fannin, number 3. I apologize. Loveland and Warren are my round 1 guys. And then I do have Harold Fannin firmly in my round 2. Early round 2 for me. So we just talked about Harold Fannin as well. I'm a big Gunnar Helm fan, so I have him at number 4. I have him in that 2 to 3 range. I think he's a good mentality, workhorse, sits in the film room all the time. He's a do-it-all kind of guy with a great blocker as well. Another guy similar to Gunnar Helm, but similar style, Gunnar Helm, Mason Taylor at number 5. I have him as a round 3 grade. I love Mason Taylor's blocking ability. And then I do have a little random, well, I wouldn't say random, but I really like Elijah Arroyo's ceiling that he has, being a 5-star recruit and just crazy amounts of pass catching. I know that Miami didn't give him the production that he has, but I think his athletic ability gives him one of the highest upsides of all the tight ends in the class. I have Luke Lackey as number 7, Iowa. He's a great blocking tight end. Luke reminds me of Dawson Knox where he is right now, and that's why I have him at the 7. Great blocker. Tight end 7. Great blocker, and then can contribute in the passing game. I have Jake Briningstool at 8. We just talked about him, like his style and how he improved over the year. I have Terrence Ferguson at 9. I like his all-around ability as well. Aranda Gadsden, full-on, pass catching tight end that pretty much was most of Syracuse's offense this year. Big fan of him. I have Benjamin Urosek at 11, and then Mitchell Evans down at 12. Those two bottoms are the round 5 area, 5+, and then it goes higher in that one. So, Travis, let me know what you got.
You're muted, Travis.
It's just all wrong, right? Like there's nothing correct on the entire board.
And podcast. I'm out.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, great talk, guys. No, seriously though, I top 3 is basically the same for me because Loveland, the upside swing with him in terms of his trajectory, what he did in the last 2 seasons as a national champion, and then to put up with that mess of just putrid, terrible quarterback. There's not even a word for what Michigan did to the quarterback position. They just
Seriously.
They just disrespected the position. Like there's what Army and Navy and Air Force do at quarterback, and then like 3 or 4,000 tiers below is what Michigan was this year. So, but no, I think he's right there. So I don't dislike that at all. I'm a little bit lower on Helm. I like him as a really balanced prospect. I think I have him at tight end 8, but I have like Mason Taylor. I'm really glad you like Mason Taylor and Luke Lachey. I have Mason Taylor as 4 and Lachey's 5. Mainly because obviously the only reason is because Luke Lachey was a basketball player, so he's obviously automatically going to be good at tight end. No, he had trouble staying healthy at times, but when he was healthy, he was dominant, and everyone knew it. He was a leader. Even when older players were there alongside him, he was the leader for that team. And so I think he's going to kill the interview process. He's going to kill the pre-draft. And so I really am pumped to see where he goes. But Arroyo, I'm glad you mentioned him. I think I have like 8 or 9. No, 9. Yeah. So a little bit lower on him just because it took him so long. But again, it struggled with health. I think had he stayed healthy, we may have seen a much higher ceiling much earlier from him, but we'll never know. And so, and having Briningstool at 8, I think is about right. Ferguson, is a little stiff, but I like him. Aranda Gadsden is where I have him just a little bit higher. I have him as my 7. And so I think calling him a tight end is weird. Like he's listed as tight end at Syracuse, but he was really like is he a tight end? Like I'm not sure.
He was in the database that I had.
He was a wide receiver.
Right. And I had to flip him to tight end a little bit through the draft cycle.
Yeah. And so just one of those hyper productive jumbo slots that I don't really care what his position is called. I guess for fantasy football purposes, you might if that's your thing, but that will matter. But if he gets tight end designation and he's just a jumbo slot wide receiver for wherever he lands, he's going to be really, really fun and potentially productive. If you want to have him as an inline blocker or in the backfield, I wouldn't do that often at the next level. But man, as just an offensive weapon, I couldn't rank him very low. Like I'd have him as a round 4 type as well. Yeah. So that's probably my biggest point. I would probably move him all the way up to 7, if not like 6. But everything else I like, and I wish, man, Hearsek, I just wish would have stayed healthy because he was so good at Stanford at times.
I know
he just didn't put it together. And then you go to Georgia and bury yourself behind 2 other tight ends when he got there. So I don't know. I want to believe in Hearsek. I'm glad he's listed here, but I've dropped him down just as my confidence has wavered with him. So he's just below like the guys like Prieskorn and Evans for me at this point.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I'm kind of stuck with him on Stanford sort of thing. And I also did have him on my college fantasy team last year while he was at Stanford. So like I watched all those games live sort of thing. So it kind of stuck with me. So I'm just hoping that upside kind of sticks with him in the NFL.
Yeah. What was it? The Hawaii game. He
Yeah.
had like 3 or 4 catches, and they were all just like, what in the world just happened? Like,
Yeah.
just leaping,
100%.
like touchdown, sideline, toe dragging. And it's like, who is this?
I know.
And then he got hurt immediately after, and it's like,
yeah. I know. And then Rondé Gadsden was a great point too, because I mean, even this year, we have wide receivers that are 6'5", 225 with Savion Williams and Daquan Felton. Now I can't think of the Iowa State guy. He's 6'4".
Jaden Higgins.
Yeah. Like we have some tall wide receivers, so we're just kind of blending that at that point.
Yeah, basically. Savion's gonna be fun anyway.
So
yeah.
Randall, a couple clarifications. So you have 5 tight ends going round 3 or better.
Me? No,
correct.
Actually.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
What was that, Travis or Randall?
No, I said Randall, but Travis, same question. How many tight ends do you have around 3 grade or higher?
I've got 4. So
okay.
I have Loveland, Warren, Fannin, and Taylor. And Lachey's like kind of a fringe. He's right there.
Okay. So I'm looking at Draft Tech right now, and I'm just going to kind of read out some data for tight ends. So the average draft class has 14 tight ends drafted, and that's a 6-year running total. I'm looking at 2018 to 2024. So in 2024, last year, there were 3 tight ends taken in the first 3 rounds. In 2023, there were 9 tight ends taken in the first 3 rounds. In 2022, there were 4 with 0 in round 1. And then there were 2021 had 5, 2020 had 5, 2019 had 8, and 2018 had 5. So it looks like at the top, this is going to be one of the better tight end classes, just with 4 or 5 likely going in the top 100. But what's impressive to me is that, Randall, all 12 guys here you have graded round 5 or better, right?
So it was top 175.
Which would be round 5 or better.
Yeah.
Okay. So with Randall calling out 12 tight ends, round 5 or better, that's going to be really close to the average number of tight ends that are drafted. And there's still plenty of guys that didn't make the round 5 cutoff, because we even covered a couple of them tonight, and we covered a couple of them the last several weeks. So I think you're going to see, somewhere between 15 and 25 tight ends drafted. I think you're going to see a lot drafted, eclipsing what the averages were, based upon the data that, Draft Tech collects. I think it's a pretty good tight end class.
Yeah, there's certainly depth. I think I have like 24 guys graded that could possibly get drafted. Like, I don't think that that's the most likely outcome, but there are 24 guys that are like, okay, if I squint, so.
I feel like 13 personnel has been used a lot this year and compared to the other years as well. So tight end 3 is becoming more important and things along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I do like the depth in this class. So there's probably going to be one of those guys that's in day 3 or even late day 3 that we're surprised by.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out. So Bill Sparks, thank you very much for being in the chat. You can catch Bill. I guess Bill's next podcast will be, that's right, he's out of town this week. You will not see Bill on Friday this week. You will see Bill on Friday in a week. And then I see Josh Townsend in the chat. You can catch Josh's podcasts every Monday. And I believe they're going to be doing some they did Senior Bowl last week, and then next week it will be I believe they're covering the winner of the Detroit Lions game. I believe that was the team that I assigned to Josh and Jake. So, okay. Well, We have covered tight ends for 55 minutes. We've given you 12 names to look at in the draft. And if you go to the YouTube channel and you want to see detailed scouting reports on all 12 guys that Randall has listed on his rankings graphic, the YouTube channel has every tight end podcast that we've done. You can just find the tight end channel. And if you get, 3 or 4 hours, you can listen to all of the different tight end scouting reports. And if you're looking for another position, those YouTube channels are there as well. So on behalf of Travis, Randall, myself, and all 30 people at the Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on YouTube, X, and Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. If you have a moment, try using some of the Draft Professor mock draft functionality, including a first-round challenge, a second-round challenge, rank players, and draft a team. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on our daily draft podcast tomorrow.